The first time Marcus Hayward called her just the help, Ava didn't flinch. She smiled. Smiled like someone watching a child play with scissors, knowing exactly how it would end. The second time, she decided to cut his strings. She had been at that desk for 2 years, her fingers dancing over the reservation system, her voice a velvet ribbon wrapping around every "Welcome to Hayward Global" that crossed her lips. She wasn't just the receptionist, she was the heartbeat of the entire headquarters lobby. But to Marcus, she was furniture, an accessory to his empire. That Monday morning, the sky outside Manhattan's skyline was the kind of pale, icy gray that made you believe spring would never come. The revolving doors breathed in the cold air with each new arrival, and Ava's gold nameplate caught the light like a tiny sun. Marcus swept in, flanked by 2 executives trailing him like obedient shadows. His Rolex flashed, his cologne announced him before his voice did. "Morning, Ava," he said, tossing the words like a coin he didn't care to see land. "Good morning, Mr. Hayward," she replied, the corners of her mouth curving into a polite, unreadable smile. The executives barely glanced at her. One of them, a wiry man with the kind of haircut you only get from a midtown stylist, set a file on the counter without so much as a please. Ava slid it toward her keyboard with steady hands. What no one in that lobby knew, not the executives, not the interns darting between elevators, not even the building's security, was that Ava held more than the title of receptionist. She held majority shares. She held signatures on hidden agreements. She held the future of Hayward Global like a pearl in the palm of her hand. And Marcus? He was about to find out. It had started a week earlier, when Marcus had humiliated Jamal, the only other black employee in the front office staff, during a staff meeting. "We need people with the right image greeting our clients," Marcus had said, his eyes resting on Jamal's locks for just a second too long. The silence after was thick and sour. Ava had stared at her notepad, letting her pen draw circles, because if she'd spoken then, it would have been fire. That night, she called her attorney. Now, as Marcus strode toward the elevators, Ava's phone buzzed. A short text from her lawyer, all signed. "Effective today." She took a breath, the kind you take before diving into cold water. The elevator dinged, and Marcus reappeared 2 hours later, walking with that particular swagger men where when they think the building exists for them. He stopped at her desk, sliding a folder across the counter. "Draft up the termination letter for the Rivers account," he said, "and send it to me for review before lunch." Ava looked at the folder but didn't touch it. "Actually," she said softly, "there's a termination letter you should see first." Marcus arched an eyebrow. "What are you talking about?" Without breaking eye contact, she opened her desk drawer, pulled out a crisp envelope, and placed it on the counter between them. The Hayward Global letterhead gleamed at the top, but the signature at the bottom was hers, Ava L. Bennett. Marcus picked it up, scanning the first lines. She watched his expression shift from mild annoyance to bafflement, then to something sharp and incredulous. "This is a joke." "It's not," Ava said, her voice calm, but with an edge you could cut glass on. "Effective immediately, your contract as CEO of Hayward Global is terminated." The lobby, as if sensing drama, seemed to still. The hum of conversation faded. Even the espresso machine in the corner stopped hissing. Marcus's laugh was short and humorless. "You don't have the authority." "Oh, but I do," Ava interrupted, her tone slicing clean through his disbelief. "Check the shareholder registry. Or better yet, check the corporate bylaws. You'll find my name, Mr. Hayward, above yours." His mouth opened, then closed, like a man searching for air underwater. You can't just..." "I can," she said. "And I have." 2 years earlier, Ava had quietly bought up the shares of disillusioned board members, one by one. It wasn't difficult. Marcus had a knack for burning bridges and alienating allies. While he was busy making enemies, she was building an invisible empire. Her father, the late Charles Bennett, had taught her patience how to wait while others underestimated you. "Let them think you're harmless," he'd said. "That's when you're strongest." Marcus had never asked about her last name, never connected her to the Bennetts who had once been silent partners in Hayward Global's earliest ventures. Why would he? To him, she was just the black woman at the front desk. Now, he was learning the cost of not paying attention. Marcus's face was red now, the flush creeping up from his collar. "You think the board will back you on this? I've been running this company for 20 years. They already have," Ava said, slipping a second document from her drawer. It was the board's unanimous vote, signed that very morning. He snatched it from her, eyes scanning the signatures. Each one seemed to drain a little more color from his face. "You'll regret this," he said finally, the words low and venomous. "Perhaps," Ava replied, leaning forward slightly. "But I won't regret ending a reign built on arrogance, prejudice, and fear." Marcus straightened his tie, the gesture brittle. "You'll never run this place without me." Ava's smile was small, almost pitying. "Watch me." The following hours unfolded like a slow-burn drama. Security, whom Ava had already briefed, approached Marcus with professional courtesy but unshakable firmness. The executives whispered in huddles, glancing at her with a mixture of confusion and something new, respect. By noon, Marcus was gone, the echo of his departure lingering in the marble-floored lobby. And Ava? She remained at the desk until the afternoon, answering calls, directing visitors, as if nothing had changed except everything had. That night, when the last of the employees had left and the lobby lights glowed soft and golden, she stood by the glass doors and looked out at the city. The air was cold, but her chest was warm. Tomorrow, she would step into the corner office. Tomorrow, she would start reshaping Hayward Global into a place where no one would ever again be told they didn't have the right image. But tonight, she allowed herself one small victory. The quiet satisfaction of knowing that the man who had underestimated her for years had walked out of her building without even realizing, until the end, whose name was truly on the deed. And she smiled. The morning after Marcus Hayward's departure felt like the first breath after a long-held silence. Ava stepped through the revolving doors of Hayward Global not as the receptionist behind the marble counter, but as the woman who now owned the top floor. The security guard, Daniel, greeted her with a broad smile. "Good morning, Ms. Benetu, Ms. CEO, he said, fumbling over the title but clearly enjoying it. "Good morning, Daniel," she replied warmly, pausing to sign in out of habit before realizing she didn't need to anymore. She chuckled softly and handed the pen back. "Guess I'll have to break that routine." The elevator ride to the top floor was a strange ascent. Each floor they passed felt like another layer of invisibility shedding away. The mirrored walls reflected not just her navy blue suit, but the quiet determination in her eyes. When the doors opened, she was met with a blast of cool, conditioned air and a hallway lined with frosted glass offices. At the far end, the corner office stood with its door open, sunlight spilling across a mahogany desk that had been Marcus's domain for 2 decades. Ava stepped inside. The air still carried the faint scent of his cologne, mingled with the leather of the high-backed chair. On the desk sat a crystal paperweight, a pen holder, and a framed photo of Marcus shaking hands with a senator. She picked up the frame, studied the handshake. 2 men smiling with their eyes closed and set it face down. "Coffee." She turned to see Rachel, Marcus's former executive assistant, hovering at the door. Rachel was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed, and known for keeping Marcus's calendar running like clockwork. She looked wary, as if unsure whether her role had an expiration date under the new regime. "Yes, please," Ava said. "Black, no sugar." "And Rachel, I'm not Marcus." Rachel blinked, then gave a small nod. "Understood." By mid-morning, Ava was seated at the head of the long, glass conference table with the senior leadership team arrayed before her. The atmosphere was stiff, the kind where polite smiles conceal clenched jaws. "Before we begin," Ava said, resting her hands lightly on the table, "let me address the obvious. Yes, I am your new CEO. No, this was not a coup. It was a decision supported unanimously by the board. And yes, things will change." One of the VPs, a heavy-set man named Coleman who had been with the company almost as long as Marcus, leaned forward. "Change how exactly?" "For starters," Ava said, "Hayward Global will become a place where talent is valued over image. Where we invest in diversity because it's good for business and because it's right. And where every employee, regardless of race, gender, or background, feels they belong here." A few executives shifted uncomfortably. Coleman's lips tightened. "And the bottom line?" asked Patel, the CFO, her voice calm but probing. "The bottom line will grow," Ava said without hesitation. "Inclusion isn't charity, it's strategy. Our competitors haven't figured that out yet. We will." Silence followed, the kind that tests the air. Later that afternoon, Ava received an email marked urgent from legal. It contained a series of contracts Marcus had signed in his final year partnerships with shell companies, vague consulting fees, and invoices that didn't add up. The deeper she scrolled, the more the numbers began to tell a story she didn't like. She called Patel into her office. "These consulting fees," Ava said, tapping the screen, "look suspicious. Do you know who approved them?" Patel adjusted her glasses. "Marcus. I flagged them once, but he brushed it off." "Who are these consultants?" Patel hesitated. "Some of them don't exist." A cold current slid down Ava's spine. Marcus hadn't just run the company with arrogance, he'd been siphoning money. And if the contracts were tied to his name, there was a chance he was still pulling strings from outside. That evening, Ava stayed late, poring over files until the building was nearly empty. The lobby lights below glowed dimly, and she could just make out the night cleaning crew moving like shadows. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jamal. "Proud of you. Keep going." She smiled at the message but couldn't shake the weight pressing in. Taking Marcus down publicly was one thing. Dismantling the network he'd left behind would be another. A knock at her office door pulled her from the documents. Rachel stood there again, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You'll need this," she said, setting one on the desk. "Thank you," Ava said, wrapping her hands around the warmth. Rachel hesitated, then spoke quietly. "You should know. Marcus called me this afternoon. Said he has friends who won't like what you're doing." Ava's grip on the mug tightened. "Friends or accomplices?" Rachel gave a faint, wry smile. "In this company, it's hard to tell the difference." The next day, Ava called a private meeting with the board. She presented the evidence of Marcus's financial misconduct, each slide sharper than the last. Photos of shell offices with no occupants. Bank transfers routed through offshore accounts. Vendor names linked to old political donors. "This is not just about money," Ava said, her voice firm. "This is about the soul of the company. If we let this rot stay, we are no better than the man we removed." The board members exchanged tense glances. Finally, Chairwoman Lynn Trent spoke. "You have our support. Clean it up whatever it takes." Over the following week, Ava moved quietly but decisively. She froze suspicious accounts, terminated questionable contracts, and brought in an independent audit team. Word spread through the building that the new CEO wasn't afraid to burn down the old order if it meant building something better. Some employees were thrilled. Others were terrified. On Thursday, as Ava stepped into the elevator, she overheard 2 mid-level managers talking. "She's going to tank us," one said. "Or save us," the other replied. Ava didn't turn around, but her reflection in the elevator doors showed the smallest smile. Friday afternoon brought a storm. Marcus himself walked into the lobby, ignoring security's protests. His silver hair was perfectly in place, his suit immaculate, but his eyes burned. "You think you can erase me?" he said, striding into her office without knocking. "I don't need to erase you, Marcus," Ava said, standing to meet his glare. "You're doing that all by yourself." He dropped a folder onto her desk. "These are the clients who'll walk if I'm not here. Your diversity fairy tale won't keep them." Ava opened the folder, scanned the list, and then looked up. "Half these clients are tied to your shady contracts. If they walk, they take the liability with them." "Thank you." For the first time, Marcus looked unsure. "You've made powerful enemies," he said finally. Ava stepped closer, her voice low but unshakable. "I've had powerful enemies my whole life. You just made the mistake of underestimating me." Marcus held her gaze for a long moment, then turned and left without another word. When the door shut behind him, Ava exhaled slowly. The war wasn't over, but the first battle was hers. That night, as rain tapped against the office windows, Ava sat alone, watching the city lights blur through the glass. The path ahead was treacherous, but she knew one truth as solid as the marble in the lobby downstairs. The girl behind the desk was gone. The woman in charge was here to stay. The smear campaign began on Monday. By 9 a.m., anonymous sources were feeding stories to business blogs, rumors about Ava's qualifications, whispers about her hidden agenda, and even outright lies about financial impropriety. Stock prices wavered, not plummeting, but twitching enough to give the board heart palpitations. Rachel dropped a printed article on Ava's desk. "New CEO's diversity agenda risks collapse of Hayward Global," the headline screamed. Ava scanned it, her expression unreadable. Marcus. Rachel nodded. The timing is too perfect. Patel entered moments later, carrying a tablet. And he's not stopping there. There's a PR firm quietly pushing op-eds against you in industry publications. If this keeps up, you'll spend all your time putting out fires. Ava set the paper down. Then let's start a bigger one. That afternoon, she called in Hayward Global's in-house PR team. They sat around her conference table, waiting for orders. I'm not going to defend myself against lies, Ava began. We're going to drown them out with truth. Full transparency. We'll release a detailed statement about Marcus's misconduct contracts, offshore accounts, the lot. But we won't stop there. We'll also release a new strategic plan that shows exactly how diversity and inclusion will drive profits. The head of PR, a tall woman named Elena, frowned. If you release those documents, Marcus might sue. He can try, Ava said. But the board has already signed off. We've got the receipts and the law on our side. Elena's frown slowly curved into a grin. Then let's make it impossible for them to look away. By Wednesday, the press conference was set. The board members were nervous, some advising caution, others quietly cheering her on. The morning of the event, Ava stood in front of her bathroom mirror, fastening the last button on her white silk blouse. Her reflection stared back with steady eyes. This was more than a press conference, it was an unmasking. When she arrived at headquarters, the lobby was filled with camera crews, reporters, and curious employees. She stepped up to the podium, the hum of voices fading to silence. Good morning, she began, her voice resonating across the marble. I'm Ava Bennett, CEO of Hayward Global. I took this position with a promise to lead with integrity, vision, and inclusivity. Today, I'm here to deliver on that promise. She didn't waste time. Slide after slide appeared on the large screen beside her: contracts with shell companies, payment trails to offshore accounts, evidence of board votes removing Marcus. Gasps rippled through the crowd. This, she said, pointing to a chart showing the siphoned funds, is why change is not optional, it's essential. This company deserves leaders who build, not bleed it dry. And we're not just replacing old leadership with new faces. We are rebuilding the foundation. Then came the second half of her presentation: data on how companies with diverse leadership teams outperformed their competitors, how inclusion drove innovation, how market share grew when customers saw themselves reflected in the brand. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. And somewhere, she knew, Marcus was watching. That evening, Ava received a call from Jamal. You should see this, he said, sending her a link. It was a live news segment. Marcus, looking far less polished than usual, was being grilled by a sharp-tongued anchor. Every time he tried to deflect, she brought the conversation back to the evidence Ava had revealed. Mr. Hayward, the anchor said, if you believe the allegations against you are false, will you open your financial records to independent investigators? Marcus's jaw tightened. My attorneys will respond. It was the last interview he gave for months. The next day brought something Ava hadn't expected: flowers. Dozens of them, sent by employees from every department. Notes of support flooded her inbox. Thank you for standing up. You've made me believe in this company again. Proud to work here. In the break room, someone had pinned up a cartoon of Ava standing like a superhero over the crumbling ruins of old Hayward. She laughed when she saw it, but it also reminded her of the weight on her shoulders. Because while Marcus's public image was in flames, there were still embers of his influence smoldering inside the company. Late Friday afternoon, Patel burst into her office. You need to see this. She placed a folder on the desk: internal memos showing that certain mid-level managers had been funneling information to Marcus. Meeting notes, draft proposals, even security logs. They're trying to undermine you from the inside, Patel said grimly. Ava flipped through the pages, her pulse steady. Then it's time for the second wave. The following week, Ava announced an internal audit not just of finances, but of operations, communications, and compliance. Anyone caught leaking confidential information would face termination. At the same time, she rolled out a leadership development program, offering training and advancement opportunities to employees from underrepresented backgrounds. It was a two-pronged strategy: cut out the rot and nourish the healthy roots. Predictably, the resistance grew louder before it broke. A group of managers confronted her in the boardroom. claiming the audit was creating a culture of fear. You know what really creates a culture of fear? Ava said, leaning forward. Working under leadership that punishes you for who you are, not what you can do. That ends here. If you can't operate with integrity, this company isn't the place for you. The silence that followed was not disagreement, it was the sound of people realizing the rules had changed. On Thursday night, Ava received an unexpected visitor. Rachel appeared at her door, holding a small black notebook. This was delivered anonymously to the front desk. No note, no return address. I think you should see it. Ava opened it. Inside were handwritten entries, dates, amounts, names. The handwriting was unmistakable. Marcus's. It was a ledger, a personal record of every illicit deal, every kickback, every payoff. At the bottom of the last page, one name caught her eye. Her father's. The entry was dated 25 years ago, before Ava was even in college. It detailed a buyout payment to Charles Bennett for his early shares in Hayward Global. The amount was far below market value, and the notation beside it read, "Secured permanent leverage over Bennett family." Her breath caught. It wasn't just business. Marcus had built part of his empire by exploiting her father. And now, it was personal. She spent the weekend with the ledger, piecing together the timeline. Her father had never spoken ill of Marcus, perhaps out of dignity, perhaps out of resignation. But the truth was here in ink. Marcus had manipulated him out of his rightful stake, then used that leverage to keep the Bennett family out of decision-making for decades. Ava thought of her father's words, "Let them think you're harmless." She understood now hadn't been waiting for his moment. He'd been waiting for hers. Monday morning, she walked into the boardroom with the ledger in hand. The members looked up expectantly. "This," she said, placing it on the table, "is the final chapter of Marcus Hayward's story." She laid out the entries, the patterns, the proof. And when she finished, she made her request. "We will pursue full legal action, not just to recover what was stolen from this company, but from the people who built it, including my father." The vote was unanimous. 2 months later, the headlines told the rest. Former CEO faces criminal charges in corporate fraud case. Hayward Global launches new era under Bennett's leadership. Diversity-driven growth strategy yields record profits. In the final press conference, Ava stood before the cameras, wearing the same calm smile she'd worn behind the reception desk years ago. "Some will say this was a story about revenge," she said. "It wasn't. It's a story about reclaiming what's ours, our dignity, our voice, our future. And about never letting anyone decide your worth based on the color of your skin." The applause was long and unbroken. When she stepped down from the podium, she felt lighter, not because the fight was over, but because she knew the company's next chapter would be written by many hands, not just hers. The day she moved out of the corner office for the first time into a larger, more open workspace she designed to be shared with her leadership team, she walked past the marble reception desk. Daniel, the security guard, grinned. "Guess you won't be sitting there again, huh?" Ava laughed. "No. But I'll never forget what I learned from behind it." And she kept walking, the sound of her heels on the marble echoing like a quiet promise. "No one underestimates me twice." 6 months after Marcus's arrest, Hayward Global didn't look or feel anything like the company Ava had inherited. The marble floors still gleamed, the glass walls still sparkled in the morning sun, but the energy was different. Meetings no longer felt like courtrooms. Ideas came from everywhere, from interns in sneakers, from accountants in hijabs, from engineers who'd once kept their heads down because no one listened. Ava's leadership team was a mosaic of backgrounds, skill sets, and perspectives. Every Friday morning, the conference room smelled of fresh bagels and strong coffee as teams from different departments met to share wins and challenges. And when someone spoke, every head turned to listen. Still, there was one piece of unfinished business. The court case against Marcus was dragging on. His lawyers filed delay after delay, hoping to wear down the prosecution. But Ava had no intention of letting him fade quietly into the background. One crisp October morning, she received a call from her attorney. The judge just approved full public release of the ledger. Every page, every entry. It'll be part of the trial record. Ava leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes. She could almost hear her father's voice. "Patience, Ava. Release it to the press," she said. Today, the fallout was immediate. Business news channels ran segments dissecting the ledger's entries, tracing money from Marcus's accounts to political campaigns, luxury properties, and silent payoffs. But the entry about Charles Bennett drew particular attention. Looks like the former CEO built his empire on more than shady contracts, one anchor said. He exploited early partners, including the father of the woman who now leads the company. Some would call that poetic justice. For Ava, it wasn't about poetry. It was about truth and about making sure no one else could bury it again. 3 weeks later, she received an invitation she almost declined, a keynote speech at the National Business Ethics Summit in Washington, D.C. The theme was rebuilding trust. She knew what she wanted to say. The ballroom was a sea of navy suits and polished shoes, the air thick with the smell of expensive perfume and ambition. When Ava stepped onto the stage, there was polite applause. She began without preamble. 6 months ago, I took over a company in crisis. Not just financial crisis, but a crisis of integrity. The man who ran it for 2 decades had left behind a culture where power meant the right to diminish others, to decide who was worthy based on race, on gender, on status. She paused, letting her gaze sweep the room. I was underestimated from the moment I walked through those doors as a receptionist. I smiled when they called me just the help. I smiled because I knew something they didn't, that my worth was never theirs to define. The room was silent now, every eye fixed on her. Leadership is not about the corner office. It's not about the title. It's about responsibility to your people, to your customers, to the truth. And if you're lucky enough to be underestimated, remember this: the element of surprise is a weapon. Use it well. The applause this time was not polite. It was thunderous. Back in New York, Ava returned to her new officia space without walls, filled with plants, sunlight, and the low hum of collaboration. On her desk was a single white envelope with no name. Inside was a note in unfamiliar handwriting. You don't know me, but I worked under Marcus for 10 years. You gave me the courage to speak up. Thank you. She kept the note, slipping it into the same drawer where she'd once hidden Marcus's termination letter. That winter, Hayward Global launched the Bennett Initiative, a program offering paid internships and scholarships to underrepresented students in business and technology. Within weeks, applications flooded in from across the country. Ava visited the first cohort of interns in their workspace, a bright, glass-walled room buzzing with energy. She walked between desks, listening to their ideas, their laughter, their determination. One young woman with deep brown skin and bright red braids stopped her. "Ms. Bennett," she said shyly, "my mother used to tell me there was no place for people like us in places like this." "You proved her wrong." Ava smiled. "NOI proved her right. We belong here. Always have." In early spring, the trial finally ended. Marcus Hayward was convicted on multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. The judge's words echoed in the courtroom. This sentence is not only a punishment for the crimes committed, but a warning to those who believe wealth grants immunity from justice. As the gavel fell, Marcus glanced toward Ava. For the first time, his expression held no arrogance, only the hollow look of a man who had built his life on the illusion of power and watched it crumble. Ava met his gaze without flinching, then turned and walked out into the bright afternoon. The night the verdict came in, Ava stood alone in the lobby of Hayward Global. The marble floors reflected the soft glow of the pendant lights. She walked to the reception desk, the place where it had all begun for her, and rested her hand on the cool stone. In her mind, she saw the younger version of herself, smiling at Marcus, taking the folder, hiding her power in plain sight. She whispered, "Thank you for underestimating me." Then she turned away, the echo of her footsteps carrying her toward the elevators and the future she'd built with her own hands. Months later, Hayward Global was named one of the most ethical companies in the world. Profits had not only recovered, they'd soared. The Bennett Initiative had expanded to 3 countries. And on a quiet Saturday morning, Ava visited her father's grave in Harlem. She placed fresh lilies at the base of the headstone and sat for a while, the city's hum fading into the background. "I wish you could see it, Dad," she said softly. "They know our name now. Not because he gave it to them, but because I took it back." The wind stirred the trees above, and for a moment, she imagined she could hear him. "Proud of you, Ava." She smiled, rose, and walked back toward the waiting car. That evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Ava stood on her apartment balcony, watching the city lights blink awake. She thought of the battles she'd fought, the open ones, the quiet ones, the ones still to come. And she knew this truth as clearly as the first day she'd stepped behind that reception desk. Power isn't given. It's claimed. And once you have it, you use it not to close doors behind you, but to hold them open for everyone still waiting in the hall. The next morning, she arrived at Hayward Global to find Daniel holding the door for a nervous-looking young man in a cheap suit. "First day?" she asked. He nodded. "Yeah, marketing intern." She grinned. "Welcome to the top floor." The elevator doors closed, carrying them upward together. And somewhere far below, the marble lobby waited for the next person who would walk in, underestimated and ready. Because here, in the company she now owned, no one would ever again be just the help. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.